You stole from people who actually need help.
I gave it to someone who needed it more than I did.
Mommy, are they gonna take you?
No one is taking me away from you.
I know the difference between fear and guilt.
Then you know they are trying to destroy me.
We must address these breaches.
You lied to me.
I hid who I was.
You have no idea what pressure I was under.
You can have my lucky star.
And I can face anything.
Attention, security alert in the main concourse.
Beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of Chicago Central Station, a weary single mother clutches her feverish child, while the station director's voice cuts like a blade, accusing her of theft from those who truly need help. Claire Dawson stands frozen, her tired body trembling as the crowd around the turnstiles transforms into silent spectators, watching a woman's life unravel in real time. The accusation rings out loud and clear. Her commuter relief card was used improperly, stolen from those who cannot afford to go without, but Claire knows the truth in her bones. She had given it away the night before, pressing the last ticket into the shaking hands of an elderly woman who needed urgent care, her own desperate need for home forgotten in that moment of grace. The station director's polished anger glides toward her like a knife unsheathed, her gold badge gleaming under the sterile lights as she holds the card high for all to see. A murmur ripples through the crowd. One man lifts his phone, another woman leans in just close enough to savor the humiliation unfolding before her eyes. Claire's lips part in disbelief, her voice trembling but unbroken as she whispers, "I didn't steal it. I gave it away," her words barely rising above the station's hum. Erica Shaw's smile is icy perfection, her polished composure cracking only slightly as she retorts, "So you admit you had it," twisting Claire's kindness into evidence of guilt. Poppy tugs at her sleeve, her feverish voice trembling as she asks the question that splits Claire's heart in two. "Mommy, are they going to take you?" Across the concourse, near a stained maintenance cart and a mop bucket worn by years of use, a man in a gray work jacket tightens his grip on a broom handle, his gray eyes sharpening with quiet recognition. Nobody knows that beneath the worn disguise of Eli Reed stands Noah Whitmore, the man who owns the station, the trains, the gates, and the commuter relief fund Erica just weaponized against an innocent woman. Claire Dawson is 29, her body shaped by years of lifting burdens heavier than exhaustion itself, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, her tired face still holding a beauty that people notice only when they dare to look twice. She never used her looks as leverage. She used her hands, packing bakery boxes at dawn, wiping tables at a dental office on weekends, wrapping her daughter in warmth every night like a promise she swore to keep no matter the cost. 3 years earlier, her dreams had been within reach. Certification, a clinic job, an apartment bathed in sunlight where basil could grow on the windowsill, until Poppy's father vanished without a trace, leaving only silence and a broken promise. Claire stopped waiting for the next call after that, taking whatever work she could get, her nights spent behind the transit kiosk where people bought coffee and the illusion of control over their lives. Every evening before work she left Poppy with Mrs. Klein in apartment 2B, the elderly woman's kindness as steady as her bad knee and her habit of overfeeding anyone she loved. That night, before Claire left for the station, Poppy wrapped her arms around her waist and asked the same question she always did when her mother looked too tired. "Mom, are you coming home before I wake up?" Claire kissed the top of her daughter's head and whispered the steadiness of someone building a bridge out of her own body. "Before you wake up." At the same moment, on the 41st floor of Whitmore Urban Mobility, Noah Whitmore stares at the city he owns but does not understand, his private office silent as the weight of every unanswered question presses upon him. The press calls him a transit visionary, investors call him disciplined, board members call him efficient, employees call him Mr. Whitmore, but nobody calls him Noah anymore. At 38, he controls rail lines and bus depots, ferry contracts and parking structures, digital systems, and the city's largest commuter access network. Yet the more he builds, the more he understands the ugly truth no polished report can hide. A system can function perfectly and still leave human beings behind. He realizes the ghost of his younger sister Lily haunting every platform, every announcement, every winter storm that still makes her flinch. 6 weeks earlier, An unsigned letter landed on his desk, written by Walter Price, a station cleaner who dared to say what no polished report ever showed. People who cannot pay are treated like they do not exist. The Safe Ride Fund is supposed to help them, yet it is being used for something far darker. Noah brought the letter to Erica Shaw, his chief operating officer, whose calm was as polished as her tailored navy coat and gold badge, and whose response was colder than winter. An isolated complaint. The station runs better than it ever has. Noah did not believe her, so he stopped arriving in black cars, borrowed a gray maintenance jacket from a retired contractor, and became Eli Reed for 9 nights, mopping floors and listening to the station's hidden truths. He saw commuters step over sleeping men as if poverty were a spill on the floor, heard security guards joke about people who asked for warm room access, watched executives glide through the concourse without ever looking down at the faces below. And every night he noticed Claire Dawson, the woman who never gave speeches about kindness but simply did things nobody else seemed to notice, her hands always moving towards someone else's need before her own. She gave leftover pastries to a janitor who swore he wasn't hungry, crouched to zip a child's coat while a mother fumbled with bags, kept spare charging cords behind the kiosk for dying phones, and sprinted after a tourist who dropped his wallet before the train doors shut. Noah could not understand her. He had built an empire on the belief that every decision had an incentive, but Claire lived as if human beings were incentive enough, her kindness as natural as breathing. Claire returned to Chicago Central before sunrise, the next morning her body aching from a night spent on a plastic bench near Platform 2, refusing Mrs. Klein's offer to crash on the couch. She could not bear Poppy, seeing her come home at dawn smelling of coffee, rain, and public humiliation, nor could she let her daughter know the rent was due in 4 days and the electricity bill was already late. At 6:11 a.m., Erica Shaw found her behind the kiosk, her navy coat immaculate, her gold badge gleaming with untouchable authority, her polished anger visibly irritated by anyone who dared to look tired. "Claire," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "come with me," leading her into the office beside the lost and found desk where 2 security guards stood waiting, their silence heavier than any accusation. On the table sat a red envelope, the same one Claire had seen the night before in the hands of a man in a red cap near the ticket machines, who had hurried toward the donation box and shoved it inside before vanishing too quickly. Erica opened the envelope to reveal 12 prepaid transit cards and a printed receipt for $600 from the Safe Ride Fund, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she declared, "This was found in your locker." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Impossible, she wanted to scream, but the words tangled in the weight of her disbelief, her hands gripping the counter to steady herself against the storm. "I have never seen that envelope," she said, her voice trembling but clear, her mind racing back to the night before, to the child who dropped coins near the fund box, to the lid she lifted just long enough to gather them. Erica's mouth curved without warmth, her eyes hardening as she leaned in. "You were seen near the fund box," twisting Claire's small act of kindness into proof of theft. "I was helping an elderly woman buy a ticket," Claire insisted, her voice rising above the tightness in her throat, her eyes flickering toward the cards meant for those who could not afford emergency travel. "So you admit you had access," Erica purred, her polished composure cracking only slightly as she added, "You understand that theft from a public assistance fund is a criminal matter." Claire's throat tightened, her hands folding at her sides to keep them from shaking, her mind flashing with images of Poppy, of Mrs. Klein, of the rent due and the electricity bill already late. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, despite the way the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Erica's eyes darkened, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried like a threat. "Then why does the security footage show you opening the donation box?" Claire remembered the child's coins, the lid she lifted just long enough to gather them, the way Erica had not merely accused her but arranged the accusation itself, her polished anger now a weapon aimed straight at Claire's heart. By 7 a.m., the story had spread through the station like wildfire. Baristas stopped talking when Claire approached. A supervisor quietly removed her from the morning schedule, and a woman in a bright orange coat whispered loud enough for all to hear, "That's the one who stole from Charity." Claire wanted to scream, to tell them she had spent the night on a bench, because she gave her last ticket to a stranger. But life had taught her a harsher lesson. People who had already decided what you were did not need more information. They needed a story that made them feel safe from becoming you. At 7:28 a.m., Erica marched her through the main concourse, the station already packed with commuters moving beneath the giant clock, announcements echoing overhead, a violinist playing near the escalators making the whole scene feel crueler. Erica stopped at the security desk where two officers waited, her polished voice ringing out like a verdict. "Claire Dawson, you are suspended pending investigation." Poppy's name flashed through Claire's mind, the rent, the electricity bill, the bottle of fever medicine Mrs. Klein had bought yesterday on her own debit card, her hands folding at her sides to keep them from shaking. "I didn't do this," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the station's hum, her eyes flickering toward the crowd watching her fall, their phones already recording, their whispers already spreading. Erica looked around at the crowd she had gathered, her polished voice dripping with satisfaction as she declared, "Then you should have thought about that before you stole from people who have nothing." The sentence landed exactly where Erica meant it to land. A phone rose in the air, then another, their flashes cutting through the station's sterile light like blades as Claire's life unraveled in real time. Across the concourse, near the maintenance cart and the mop bucket stained by years of use, Noah Whitmore watched in his gray work jacket, his jaw clenched hard enough to ache, his gray eyes sharpening with quiet fury. He had seen enough to know Claire was being framed, but he did not step forward, not yet, because he had learned in business that a lie was most dangerous when you interrupted it too early. Sometimes Noah knew you had to let it reveal who was feeding it, and Erica Shaw's polished anger was feeding on something far uglier than Claire's kindness. Claire walked out of the station at 7:41 a.m., carrying a cardboard box with her apron, a cracked coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Mom," 2 granola bars, and a crayon drawing Poppy had slipped into her bag before school. The drawing showed Claire and Poppy standing in front of a building with a giant clock. Above them in crooked purple letters Poppy had written, "Mommy works where everybody goes home," the words blurring in Claire's vision as she stared at them. "Claire," a voice called from behind, and she turned to see Eli, the maintenance worker, standing under a leaky awning with an umbrella already soaked by the rain, his gray eyes tired in a way that felt old. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words, his gaze unwavering as he added, "I saw a woman get blamed for something she did not do." Claire gave a tired laugh that had no humor in it, her voice trembling as she replied, "You don't know that," her mind flashing with the security footage, with Erica's polished anger, with the way the station had turned on her in an instant. Eli's eyes were gray, not cold, but tired in a way that felt ancient, the kind of weariness that came from years of watching bad things happen and blaming himself for not stopping them sooner. He held out the umbrella, his voice firm as he said, "Let me walk you to the bus." And Claire wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage, but the words caught in her throat as the weight of the morning pressed down on her. They walked in silence to the corner, the rain tapping against the umbrella's fabric like a metronome, counting the seconds of her humiliation. And at the bus stop, Claire sat on the bench and told him about Poppy. Not everything, just enough to make the words feel real, to make the weight of her life feel lighter for a moment, to tell him about Mrs. Klein who would worry, about the job she could not afford to lose, about the envelope Erica claimed was in her locker. Eli listened without interrupting, his presence steady as the rain, his voice cutting through the silence when the bus arrived to say, "Do not sign anything Erica gives you," his words landing harder than Claire expected. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely rising above the hissing of the bus doors, her mind flashing with the security footage, with Erica's polished anger, with the way the station had turned on her in an instant. Eli's voice was quiet but firm as he replied, "Because people who are sure of the truth do not rush you to put your name on a lie," his words wrapping around Claire like a promise she wanted to believe. That afternoon, Noah returned to his office, removed the gray jacket, and called his chief of security with a voice as sharp as winter steel. "I want every camera feed from Chicago Central, not the edited clips, every raw file from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. His security chief asked whether this was about the Safe Ride Fund complaint, and Noah's voice was cold as he replied, "It is now," the weight of the words pressing down like the city outside his window. Noah then called Walter Price, the cleaner who had written the original letter, and the silence on the other end was so long Noah thought the call had dropped before Walter finally spoke, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Mr. Whitmore, I thought you'd be taller." Walter told him what he had seen, Erica Shaw's assistant, Damon Pike, regularly removing envelopes from the fund box after midnight, loading prepaid cards into an unmarked backpack, using keys to staff lockers, handing stacks of cards to a driver from a private shuttle company, and laughing like it was a joke. Noah asked why Walter had not reported it earlier, and Walter's voice was quiet but firm as he replied, "Because Erica makes people disappear from the schedule. People like me do not have savings to be brave in the way rich people mean it." Noah sat very still, that sentence hurting because it was true. the weight of it pressing down like the city outside his window, the weight of every system that left human beings behind. Meanwhile, Claire went home to find Poppy at the kitchen table in yellow pajamas, coloring a train with a blue crayon. Mrs. Klein standing at the stove, pretending not to watch Claire's face as she set the box on the table. "How was work?" Poppy asked, her voice small but steady, and Claire tried to smile as she replied. "Complicated, baby," the word catching in her throat like a stone. Poppy put down the crayon and asked, "Did somebody make you sad?" And Claire's hands tightened around the box as she tried to smile, the weight of the day pressing down like the rain outside. Poppy slid off her chair and hugged her, pressing a glittery gold star into Claire's palm from her pajama pocket, and Claire took it with both hands, her vision blurring for one dangerous second as she nearly cried. Then there was a knock at the apartment door, and Claire froze. Nobody knocked without calling first, and when she opened it, Eli stood in the hallway holding a grocery bag, his expression embarrassed as he said, "I was in the neighborhood." Claire frowned, her voice sharp with disbelief as she replied, "You do not know where I live." And Eli looked down at the floor before admitting, "Mrs. Klein told me when I asked if you got home safely." Mrs. Klein lifted one eyebrow behind Claire as if to say, "He seemed decent enough," and Eli raised the grocery bag, his voice steady as he said, "I brought dinner, not charity. I bought too much," the words wrapping around Claire like a lifeline. Inside were pasta, fresh vegetables, milk, and strawberries, and Poppy's eyes widened like she was staring at a holiday miracle, and Claire almost refused before remembering what it felt like to have nothing left to offer a child except pretending. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the refrigerator, and Eli stayed for dinner because Poppy asked if he knew how to draw trains, even though his train looked like a rectangle wearing a hat. Poppy laughed so hard she nearly slid off her chair, and Claire watched him laugh with her, the apartment feeling for the first time in months like a room where tired people were still allowed to be loved instead of just surviving. Over the next week, Eli became a strange, quiet part of their routine, never arriving with grand gestures but fixing the loose cabinet hinge, showing Poppy how to fold a paper boat, walking Claire to the legal aid clinic where he helped her organize every detail she remembered from the night she had been accused. He asked careful questions. "What time did you close the kiosk? Who else had access to the service hall? What did Damon Pike say when he passed you near the locker room?" And Claire remembered Damon's exact words. "Big night for charity," said with a smile that made her skin crawl. One evening, while Poppy slept, Claire and Eli sat on the apartment steps beneath a porch light that flickered every few seconds, and Claire said, "You are too good at this," her voice soft in the quiet. "At what?" Eli asked, his gaze fixed on the street as he replied, seeing patterns, his voice carrying the weight of years spent managing systems that left human beings behind. Claire smiled faintly, her voice barely rising above the flickering light as she said, "That explains the serious face." And Eli looked at her then, his voice dropping to a whisper as he said, "I have made a lot of decisions that looked good on paper." Claire waited, her heart pounding in the quiet as Eli's voice lowered, breaking like a dam. "My sister was afraid of train stations. I told her the system was safe. I told her she had nothing to worry about." Claire did not ask what happened, her voice steady as she said, "You loved her." And Eli swallowed hard before replying, "Yes," the word catching in his throat like a sob. Claire leaned her shoulder lightly against his, her voice barely rising above the flickering light as she said, "You cannot go back. But you can stop pretending you do not care now," her words wrapping around him like a promise he wanted to believe. Noah closed his eyes, the weight of her honesty pressing down, like the city outside his window, the weight of every decision he had ever made that looked good on paper but left human beings behind. The evidence began to build the next morning. Raw footage showed Damon entering the staff corridor at 11:18 p.m., carrying the red envelope, unlocking Claire's locker, the weight of the footage pressing down like the city outside his window. But the most important 37 seconds were missing. Someone had deleted them from the central server, and Noah's security team traced the deletion authorization to Erica Shaw's executive credentials. The weight of the truth pressing down like the city outside his window. Noah knew enough about people like Erica to know she would not fold quietly, and within hours she made her move, inviting Claire to a public disciplinary hearing at Chicago Central. Not a private review, but a public one, knowing the media had picked up the story of station worker accused of stealing aid funds. Claire did not want to go, her voice trembling as she told Eli, "I cannot stand in that station again," and Eli's voice was gentle but firm as he replied, "You have to. Not because you owe them a performance. Because Poppy should grow up knowing her mother did not bow her head for somebody else's lie." At the hearing, the main concourse was packed. Employees stood along the balcony, local reporters crowded near the barriers, transit council members sat in a row of folding chairs, and Erica stood behind a podium beneath the giant station clock, her polished composure untouched by the storm around her. Claire stood alone beside a folding table, her heart pounding in the quiet as a reporter asked the question that changed the air in the room. "Mrs. Dawson, is it true you were seen giving away your own ticket to a passenger the same night you allegedly stole transit cards?" Claire looked at Erica, her eyes flickering toward the polished anger that had probably never had to stand in line for anything in its life. And Erica's eyes flashed. A tiny crack, a moment of vulnerability before she regained her composure. "Yes," Claire said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I gave my ticket away," the words rising above the crowd like a defiant flag. "And why would you do that?" The reporter pressed, and Claire's voice was clear as she replied. "Because the woman needed to get to the hospital," the weight of the truth pressing down like the station's hum. A murmur moved through the crowd, Erica's polished composure cracking only slightly as she took the microphone and declared, "This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation we have seen from Ms. Dawson. Kindness does not excuse misconduct." Claire's face went pale, the weight of the accusation pressing down like the station's hum, and then the crowd shifted. A man in a dark suit walked through the doors from the executive corridor, people recognizing him before Claire did. Station employees straightened, security guards moved aside, Erica stopped breathing for half a second, and Noah Whitmore stepped toward the podium. No gray jacket, no Eli Reed, no maintenance cart, just the man whose portrait hung in the lobby and whose signature was on every employee contract. Claire stared at him as if the floor had opened, her voice barely rising above the station's hum as she whispered, "Noah," the word catching in her throat like a sob. He stopped in front of her, his eyes reflecting regret, as he said, "I should have told you," the weight of the words pressing down like the city outside his window. Claire stepped back, her voice trembling as she said, "You lied to me." And Noah's voice was steady despite the storm inside him as he replied, "I hid who I was," the words wrapping around her like a confession she did not want to hear. "That is the same thing," Claire whispered, her heart pounding in the quiet as Erica's polished voice tried to recover. "Mr. Whitmore, I was just about to conclude the investigation," her words dripping with satisfaction. Noah turned toward her, his voice cold as winter steel as he declared, "No, you were about to bury it." The station going so quiet that even the escalators sounded loud as the weight of the truth pressed down like the city outside his window. Claire could not hear anything except the blood rushing in her ears, her mind flashing with every conversation on the apartment steps, every careful question, every moment she had thought someone finally saw her without calculating what they could take in return. Had he been studying her? Testing her? Was she just another file on his desk? Noah reached for her hand, and Claire pulled away, her voice trembling as she said, "No, you do not get to save me after watching me drown." Then she walked out of the station while cameras flashed behind her, the weight of the world pressing down like the rain outside. And Noah stayed beneath the giant clock, realizing he had made the same mistake again. He had waited too long to be human. That night, Walter Price called Claire, not Noah, Walter, and Claire almost did not go, but Walter sounded frightened. And frightened men do not usually call unless something real is burning. When she arrived at the diner 2 blocks from the station, Walter was already in a booth with a folded newspaper and a coffee he had not touched, his voice trembling as he slid a small memory card across the table and said, "I need to tell you something. I clean the old surveillance office sometimes," he said, his voice barely rising above the hum of the diner. "I found this under the server cabinet 3 weeks ago," the weight of the words pressing down like the station's hum. Claire picked up the card, her voice barely rising above the hum as she asked, "What is this?" And Walter glanced at the door, as if expecting someone to walk in behind her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Backup footage," he said. "The cameras record locally before the files go to the main server," the weight of the words pressing down like the city outside the window. Walter's voice was tight with fear as he added, "Damon came by my apartment this morning. He told me to stop helping people who cannot help themselves," the weight of the threat pressing down like the station's hum. Claire's fingers tightened around the card, her mind flashing with the envelope in her locker, the footage showing Damon entering the corridor, unlocking her locker, the weight of the truth pressing down like the city outside the window. She slid the card into her coat pocket, her voice barely rising above the hum as she asked, "Why are you helping me?" And Walter looked down at his coffee, his voice steady despite the fear. "Because I have been cleaning this station for 12 years, he said. "I have watched people lie about poor folks long enough. the weight of the words pressing down like the station's hum. Back home, Claire borrowed Mrs. Klein's old laptop and inserted the card, her heart pounding in the quiet as the footage opened in a grainy, time-stamped window, the weight of the truth pressing down like the city outside the window. Damon entered the corridor at 11:18 p.m., carrying the red envelope, unlocking Claire's locker and sliding the envelope inside, the weight of the footage pressing down like the station's hum. But then something else appeared. At 11:10 p.m., 8 minutes earlier, Erica had entered the fund office carrying a leather case, removing cash from the Safe Ride Fund box and replacing it with a stack of prepaid cards she had not intended to distribute. Then Damon arrived, then the frame cut, and Claire watched it twice, then a third time, the truth pressing down like the city outside the window. The prepaid cards were never meant only for commuters in need. Erica had been billing Whitmore Urban Mobility for thousands of emergency transit cards every month, then selling them through a reseller tied to her brother-in-law's private shuttle company. The fund not failing by accident but being harvested. And Claire had become a problem because her small act of kindness had created a public question. Why had the woman at the hospital not received help? Why did the fund look empty when the reports said it should not be empty? Because Erica had needed a scapegoat, and Claire was exactly the kind of person powerful people expected nobody to defend, the weight of the realization pressing down like the station's hum. Noah arrived at the diner 10 minutes later, Claire not looking up when he entered, her voice tight with anger as she said, "I did not call you," and Noah's voice was steady as he replied, "I know, Walter did." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were the early findings from his internal investigation. Enough to fire Erica, enough to call the police, enough to end the entire thing quietly if he wanted to, the weight of the power pressing down like the city outside the window. Claire set the memory card on top of the folder, her voice trembling as she said, "You do not just fire her." And Noah looked at her, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "She tried to turn the whole station against me," Claire continued, her voice rising above the diner's hum. "She used money meant for people who were scared and stranded. You make it public." Noah nodded once, his voice softening as he replied, "You are right," and Claire finally met his eyes, her voice steady despite the weight of the truth. "You keep saying you understand," she said, "then understand this. I do not need a rich man to make my life pretty after it gets ugly," the weight of the words pressing down like the station's hum. Noah did not flinch, his voice steady as he replied, "I know," the weight of the honesty pressing down like the city outside the window, and Claire's voice softened as she added, "I need people to stop doing this to the next person." Noah's voice softened, his eyes reflecting something deeper than power as he replied, "Then we will make sure they cannot," the weight of the promise pressing down like the station's hum. The board hearing took place 2 days later in the same main concourse where Claire had been suspended. Noah insisting on it not because public humiliation was justice, but because Erica had used the public space as a weapon, and the truth deserved to be seen where the lie had been told. The giant clock ticked overhead, employees, commuters, reporters, and members of the City Transit Council filling the station, and for the first time Claire did not stand alone. Ely stood near the side rail in his gray jacket, Walter beside a security officer, Mrs. Klein with Poppy after school. Margaret Bell, the elderly woman Claire had helped, sat in the front row in a green raincoat with her cane tucked under her arm, her presence a quiet defiance against the polished anger that had tried to destroy an innocent woman. Erica arrived in a white suit, flanked by attorneys, her polished composure cracking only slightly as Noah stepped to the microphone, the weight of the station's hum pressing down like the city outside the window. "For years," Noah said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "this station has measured success by departures, arrivals, profits, and punctuality, the weight of the words pressing down like the station's hum. Today we are going to measure it by something simpler," he continued, his voice rising above the station's hum. "Whether people who need help are treated as human beings, the weight of the truth pressing down like the city outside the window." He played the footage, Damon entering the corridor, Erica waiting near the fund office, the envelope disappearing into Claire's locker, the weight of the images pressing down like the station's hum. Then the footage shifted to the fund box, Erica removing cash, the crowd making a sound like one shared breath-breaking, the weight of the realization pressing down like the city outside the window. Erica's lawyer stood, his voice dripping with polished outrage as he declared, "This is being taken out of context." But Noah's security chief placed the financial records on the screen, transaction after transaction, fake vendor invoices, resold transit cards, private shuttle payments. More than $400,000, siphoned from the fund over 11 months, the stolen cards not vanishing in one clean sweep, but trimmed and diverted in pieces until nobody noticed except the people who needed them, the weight of the theft pressing down like the station's hum. Erica's face drained of color, the polished anger cracking only slightly as Margaret Bell stood, her voice not loud but carrying like a whisper that became a roar. "My son is alive because that young woman gave me her ticket, and you called her a thief." The room turned toward Claire, Erica's polished composure finally cracking as she whispered, "You have no idea what pressure I was under, the weight of the guilt pressing down like the city outside the window." Claire stood straighter, her voice steady despite the storm inside her as she replied, "No, but I know what it feels like when someone with power decides your life is worth less than their convenience." The weight of the truth pressing down like the station's hum. The Transit Council voted to refer the case for criminal prosecution. Uniformed officers moved in. Damon was taken into custody at the side doors. Erica was removed from her position and charged with fraud, theft, and evidence tampering. Noah did not stop there. He announced that the Safe Ride Fund would be rebuilt with independent oversight, visible reporting, and emergency access points staffed by real people, not locked boxes nobody could trust, the weight of the promise pressing down like the station's hum. He also announced a new station policy called the Claire Line. Any passenger stranded because they could not afford emergency transit would receive a ride home without being forced to prove desperation in front of strangers, the weight of the justice pressing down like the city outside the window. Claire hated the name at first, telling Noah afterward, "It should not be named after me," and Noah's voice was soft as he replied, "Maybe not, but it should remind people why it exists," the weight of the legacy pressing down like the station's hum. 3 months later, Poppy stood in the same station concourse, wearing a yellow raincoat and holding Noah's hand, insisting on coming to the opening of the new overnight family waiting room, a room with couches and charging outlets, clean bathrooms and free hot meals, soft blankets, and a wall painted with small gold stars by volunteers from the station staff. Claire had helped design it, not as a charity case, but as the new community access coordinator for Chicago Central Station, a job that came with a salary, health insurance, paid time off, and something Claire had never known how to ask for: stability. She still lived in the same apartment for now, still counted money carefully, still worked too hard, but she no longer woke up every morning, afraid that one bad day would erase everything, the weight of the stability pressing down like the city outside the window. Noah came by often, not with flowers, not with announcements, but with groceries when Mrs. Klein's arthritis flared, with crayons when Poppy ran out, with coffee for Claire after late meetings, and with the patience to let Claire decide what trust looked like. One rainy evening, months after Erica's arrest, Claire and Noah stood beneath the station clock, the last train gone, the concourse quiet, Poppy asleep against Noah's shoulder, her yellow raincoat draped over his arm. Claire watched him look down at her daughter, her voice steady despite the rain tapping against the windows as she said, "You still owe me an apology," and Noah's voice was soft as he replied, "For lying." "For thinking you could solve everything with a plan," she added, and Noah nodded, his voice steady despite the weight of the truth as he said, "I am learning," the weight of the promise pressing down like the station's hum. Claire stepped closer, her voice barely rising above the rain as she asked, "What are you learning?" And Noah glanced toward the waiting room where a tired mother was helping her little boy zip his coat before catching the overnight bus. "That a station is not a building," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "It is the moment someone decides not to leave another person behind, the weight of the realization pressing down like the city outside the window." Claire's eyes softened, her voice barely rising above the rain as she took his hand. Not because he was rich, not because he had saved her, but because when it mattered, he had finally learned to stand beside her instead of above her. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows, inside the giant clock kept moving, and all around them, strangers were finding their way home, the weight of the promise pressing down like the city outside the window.